So I was told to talk a little bit about leadership tonight, first of all, just a few thoughts, and then we can open it up to talk about whatever you want. Certainly, I'm always happy to talk about Miami or current events or whatever you like to talk about. Of course, the thing I want to talk about most today is the fact that I had my first bumper ball experience on Saturday. If you haven't done that, it is. Have any of you done it yet?
No.
It's fantastic. You ought to get a little outing for the house. It's absolutely spectacular. And I was surprised I didn't get hurt. It's really good. So I think about leadership a lot, and so what I thought I would do is just touch real quickly on 4 points. One, what do we look for in our leaders? Number 2, what is the context for leadership today? Number 3, then what kind of leaders do we need most? And what are those qualities? And then finally, a little bit of personal philosophy that I've hung with, 3 Hodgisms that I've had for a long time. So if you think about leadership, there have been surveys of this around the world. What do you look for in a leader? If you think about for a moment, leaders you admire, what are some of the qualities? Let's just ask you, what stands out? What kind of qualities of leaders stand out?
Integrity.
Integrity?
Presence.
Presence? What do you mean by presence?
Like, if we are working towards a goal, let's just say we're building something.
Right.
I would expect the person in charge, to be there at the work site with us, whether they're working with us or not, just there.
Good. Okay. Other things? Passion?
Vision.
Vision?
Reliability.
Reliability?
Humility.
Humility. Very nice.
Empathy.
Empathy? Whoa. You guys have crafted quite a good little leader here. This is good. Well, the surveys have shown, some version of this put together, that Kuznets and Posner, who have written the best-selling book on leadership worldwide, for all the surveys across all these cultures, 4 things tend to dominate, and I think we've managed to touch on all 4 of them. The first is integrity. You want to have a leader you can trust. You want to know the leader is honest and that they're going to do what they say they're going to do. I mean, that's a really critical thing. And sadly, we're seeing a lot of instances these days where that doesn't always hold true, and with catastrophic results. So integrity is number 1. Number 2 in this list, integrity is clearly 1 after that. There's no rank order to them. They want their leaders to be inspiring. They want their leaders to be inspired. This kind of goes to the passion thing, I think. What it is I think almost all of us, if not all of us, have a hunger to be associated with something that's bigger than ourselves. So it's not just about the minutiae of every day, and it's not just about me. It's about being with other people to accomplish something special. And an inspiring leader helps to create that vision. You mentioned that word as well. Where it is we want to go. And you go, okay, this is what I want to do. It's in our DNA. It's what makes us human. It's a really powerful. It's a really powerful feature. They also, the third point, is they want competent leaders. Maybe this is a reliable question in part. They want to have leaders who can get it done. I mean, it's nice to have a great vision. It's nice to know that you're sincere and honest about what you're doing. But if you can't get this stupid stuff done, it's pretty darn frustrating, right? And if you think about the low approval ratings of Obama right at the moment, I think what I read in a lot of places, it's people are questioning the competence of the administration. Now, this is not the first time the American population has questioned the competence of the administration. And almost always, when you get into the second term, that stuff begins to go up. But it really is terribly important. You want to, how frustrating is it? You've all had that, right? You've been in group projects, you've been in something where it's pretty clear that the person in charge just can't get it done. And it can't rally you to get it done or whatever else. So that's really a problem. So the final one is about being forward-looking, is that we want our leaders to anticipate what's going to happen, not just react to what is happening. I consider this personally one of the most important of all, And I always come back to uh, talking about it as the leadership philosophy of the great one, Wayne Gretzky, and talking about playing hockey. He said, to be successful in hockey, you have to skate to where the puck is going to be. Now, any of you play soccer or any game like that know exactly what we're talking about, right? You don't just stand there and say, hey, give it to me. The most effective time is when you're moving to space and the ball is coming to meet you in that space, and away you go, or the puck comes to meet you in that space. So this is, to me, really, really important, because it's so easy to react and not to anticipate. But reacting, you're always on your heels. You're always leaning backwards. You're always letting somebody else define what you're doing. And so, now a favorite phrase is leaning in. You've got to really go after it. You have to anticipate change, and you have to do it. So those 4 qualities are really important ones, and I encourage you to think about that and reflect on your own lives and how you can incorporate that, because you're scholar leaders. You've already indicated that you have some expectations of yourself, and maybe others have already demonstrated that they have expectations of you. So it's something to reflect on. So what kind of a world are you going to be leaders in? There was a phrase that was coined in the 1990s by the military, thinking about leadership, that I think really defines the context in ways that we're all going to go. What they described is what they call a VUCA world. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Now, that's a mouthful, but it's a really good thing to think about the kind of world we're in. A world of whites and blacks, right and wrong decisions isn't the world we live in. It's a world that's volatile, that you may think you know what's going to happen, and then slam, something comes along and we're off in a direction that we hadn't anticipated. 9/11. Stuff happens. Stuff happens all the time that changes fundamentally what happens. So volatile. Uncertain. How accurately do you think you could predict the world 5 years from now? Even your own lives 5 years from now. But that uncertainty has been getting greater and greater and greater. And complexity. We're wrestling right now with all sorts of questions around student success at Miami University. And every time we try to say who's supposed to be responsible for something, we go, this person may take the lead in that responsibility. It's actually partly this and partly that and partly this and partly that. We live in a global interconnected world, and complexity is just the name of the game. You can't, it's like a big ball of string. You start to pull it out, and all of a sudden you got stuff all around you. That's the world we live in. It's really complicated. Now, part of a leader's job is to help people sort through that complexity, to sort of get to the bare essentials and what goes on. It's really interesting. We were having a conversation the other day about choices that people make in an atmosphere of complexity. We live in a world where we can make tons of choices. You just open this little guy up and start going, and they just come flooding at you, right? And one of the coping mechanisms for dealing with that complexity for a lot of people is simply to say, I'm going to choose a simple answer, and I'm going to stay with that simple answer, even if it's not the best answer, because the complexity is overwhelming. So to be a leader in the world, you have to recognize that this is what people are thinking. There's a book out, I think it was 2012, I'm not sure if that's right, called Nudge. I don't know if you've ever read that, but that's part of what this is. It's the way people are behaviorally responding to a complex world, which is to say, we'll make some suboptimal choices because we just want to make a choice and get on with it and be done with it. And the last is ambiguous. We'd like to be able to see the world in sharp contrast, but we don't. In some regards, it's not unlike my experience with bumper ball on Saturday. So for those of you who have not done bumper ball, well, nobody's done bumper ball, so, or if you don't know what it is, so it's a big plastic thing about yay big around, and in the middle is a cylinder that you crawl into. And it's got 2 shoulder straps and then 2 handholds that you go on, and then you run around and you crash into people and you fall down. They fall down. I never fell down. I was just not. Despite what you may have heard, I never fell down. It was, well, I maybe tripped once myself, but nobody knocked me down. To be really clear about that. But in this thing, one of the things that surprised me is you can't see clearly. It's, you know how you've been inside of round plastic and stuff, and it gets just a little bit foggy. So I sort of thought I couldn't tell my own teammates exactly from the other team. So I may have been a little rough on a couple of teammates. But that the point of it is that the world often is so complicated and so vague. There's an ambiguity to things. It's really virtually impossible to see it in stark clarity. And so ambiguity is a part of that. So that's the world we live in, a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So what kind of a leader does a world like that need? I would argue that, for want of a better term, and one that we have used here quite often at Miami, is we need transformational leaders. Because at the bottom line of all of this is that change is now the constant. Is that change is the one thing we can expect, change is the one thing that will drive what we're doing. It is a really, really big deal. And so a transformational leader is one who knows how to use change. Not just react to it, but how to use change. And what I mean by using change is that first, that a transformational leader will embrace change confidently and enthusiastically. Confidently and enthusiastically. A number of years ago, by the way, there's another chair here and one over here. You guys don't need to stand up. Make yourselves comfortable. You can still get up and leave early. It's no problem. So, a few years ago, we had Indra Nooyi as our commencement speaker. Indra Nooyi is the head of PepsiCo. Just a tremendous individual. Just gave a fabulous commencement address. But she had one phrase that really stuck out for me. She said, optimism is not a life's plan, but she said something to the effect, but it sure is one heck of a tailwind. And that's really important, is we don't want to be foolish and stupid and overconfident and overbearing, but if we don't have a certain measure of confidence and a certain measure of optimism, we're not going to define and seek goals that are going to advance us. We're going to shrink back into this reactive mode as opposed into this mode where we can go out and use change to make a difference. So a second element of managing change as a transformational leader is we have to see change then as an opportunity rather than a necessity. I will insist that it's a necessity. If we don't change, we're cooked. I mean, you will just change, there's no option. But it is a necessity. But think about the psychology of necessity. I mean, you go around going, oh God, I got to do this today. I got to make this change. I got to change my life. I got to change the world. I got to change Miami. It's not really very inspiring, is it? It's drudge. It's hard work, and some days you can't get around it because life is drudge and hard work, and you just have to get through it. But in general, setting out goals that are ambitious and good and forward-looking are goals that spring from our optimism about the future and our confidence that we can use change to create the future that we want. So that attitude, I think, is really, really important. And lastly, in managing change, I think we need to see change or engage change as a way to pursue excellence relentlessly. Again, this comes back to what our goals are and what our ideals are. If all we want to do is get by, well, you're not going to be a leader. You'll be a terrible leader if you're not willing to advance. And the thing about this is to remember that it's not, we take our victories, we take our steps, we take our accomplishments, step at a time, but at the end of the day, we're constantly pursuing the effort to get better. A leader will always drive that, And in a VUCA world, if you're not doing that and other people are, you are going to be left way behind. So this is our challenge, is to embrace those kinds of notions. We can use change to create opportunities. We can use change to achieve goals, but it starts with our attitudes. So that's how I see the kind of leadership that we need today. So we've got those qualities, we've got this VUCA environment, and we've got this way that transformational leaders combine those things to move ahead. So the last thing, as I promised, was just a quick 3 Hodgisms, things that I used to tell all of my graduate students, in particular my advisees when I was back at the University of Washington. The first is, and this will be no surprise following from what I just said, is try to look at the world as a glass half full. Try to look at the world as a glass half full. Let's come back to the sense of confidence, enthusiastic, optimism, all those sorts of things. I cannot tell you how important that is. It's terribly, terribly important. We've all been around people that, you know, we make reference to them as Eeyore or something like that, because we've got to look at the world where there's always something wrong, instead of seeing the things that may be only partially right, but on the road to being better. See, a good leader is going to capture that, and if you don't have that sense of the glass is half full, that we're trying to fill up the top half rather than keep the bottom half from draining further, then it's going to be very difficult to be a good leader and a good transformational leader as well. A second one is what goes round comes around. There are a lot of us who tend to try to look at life transactionally, that we want to make sure that we get back what we put in. You know, it's a normal human thing. But in a complex world, it's often very difficult to see that the effort that you put in here is coming back as a quid pro quo here. It may go out and circle around through a bunch of other activities before something good happens to you that was maybe actually unrelated to what you've done. But if we have acted consistently with good intentions and not worried about whether it benefited us directly, but because it was the right thing to do, then, and if all of us do that, sooner or later, things come back to us. So don't expect things to come back to you. Don't expect to be rewarded for everything you do. In fact, expect to be thumped on a few times when you're trying to do the right thing. But sooner or later, that's going to come back and pay off. And it may pay off just because you're receptive to it, because you haven't been expecting it and demanding it. And when it happens, you'll be receptive to it, and that will be a good thing. And the last point, and certainly one of the hardest for most of us, I will say, for me to do, is to always take the high road. I'm getting a lot of pretty nasty emails right now, and you know, my first impulse is to say something I shouldn't say. Fortunately, you know, I don't for the most part. But it's putting ourselves, and this is really important for a leader to do, putting ourselves into the potential position that the other person's in and asking the question, where does this motivation come from? Maybe it is an unfortunate expression of something. But if we're going to be a transformational leader, we have to expect people to do that. We have to expect that people aren't always going to express themselves in terms that are logical or rational, that are in terms that we want and want to embrace. And so taking the high road and assuming the best in what a person has to say and trying to take what they've said and turn it into a positive element is a huge payoff. And again, those 3 Hodgisms that I just threw in at the end, they're tough ones to live by sometimes. But if you can do that, I think it makes for great leadership. So we look for those qualities: integrity, inspiration, competence, forward-looking. Put those together with the VUCA world to get a transformational leader who really embraces change and makes it happen. So that's enough of that sort of stuff. But that's the way that I see leadership. And that's why I love being around university, in particular people like yourselves who are thinking about being leaders, because you're a lot better equipped to handle that world than many of us who came from previous generations, because you've grown up in a world and you have a sense of that complexity and that ambiguity, that uncertainty. You've seen a lot of it already. I think you can do well there.